to Consider This. Melissa, Sharad and Ibrahim here with you to take you through the major developments of the year. Now, in 2019, we celebrated many milestone anniversaries of major events, including the 50th anniversary of the May 13th riots. But public discourse around May 13th and attempts to engage with this moment in history were largely muted as this national trauma that is considered one that is best buried and forgotten. Do you guys agree with that?
Well, you know, it seems to me that, in fact, it's a trauma that can be deployed for political purpose, and we saw that very recently with the use by GAMES, a young student group, that used this as a threat against the Dongjong. And I thought what is interesting is that in this country there's this feeling that that there's a selectivity when it comes to the use of the national trauma, and that people who use it as a threat to violence often are not held to account. And that, I think, is still very troubling.
One thing that we have to look at is Malaysia in 1969 is extremely different from Malaysia in 2019. GDP was about $3,000 per person per capita at that point in time. Today we're looking at 40,000. Malaysia was going through 70% rural deployment, or rural. Malaysia was 70% of Malaysians live in rural areas. Now 30% live in rural areas. While Malaysia has changed economically, I don't know whether we have changed socio-economically.
The fabric, you mean? Like, race relations are still similar to that of 1969?
Yes. So that points to the fact that if I were to use past data to extrapolate into future data, Malaysia will be more developed, Malaysia will be richer, Malaysia will be more technologically enabled. But we're going to be stuck with race issues, with religion issues, with conservative, and then whoever that is labelled as liberal,
Ibrahim,
that's big.
Is the problem really the general population, us on the ground, our relationships with each other, our neighbours, and so on and so forth? Or is the problem politicians? I mean, it looks like politicians are the ones who are using it, not necessarily the people on the ground. And the question is, you know, whether May 13th in 1969 was a political move by certain factions of the political elite then, in order to create a situation, a context in which they could actually re-engineer the state. Because we know May 13th was followed by, well, what came before May 13 was the general election. What came after May 13 was, in fact, the National Operations Council and the suspension of democracy. And Malaysia was irrevocably redesigned, re-engineered after that point.
So we only know what happened afterwards. And coming back to your point, Sharad, I don't know whether we will ever know, because at the moment we still haven't been able to have an open conversation about it, one that is, you know, is backed by facts, that's publicly available facts. And I have to say, I mean, Malaysia Kini did a wonderful piece to mark this anniversary, the 50th anniversary. And the comments coming out of it, you know, so they did a survey and an overwhelming majority wanted to understand this tragedy better. But there were also many, on the other hand, who say that it's best buried and forgotten, who say that what good can it do revisiting this national trauma at this point in time, because who will be held accountable?
Well, okay, Ibrahim, you have a teenage daughter, right? And Hannah Alkaf has written a novel for young adults called Weight of the Sky, where she tackles the May 13th issue. Is that something that you would like your daughter to read?
Hannah Alkaf is an author that my daughter likes, because my daughter's name is also Hannah. Of course I would like to my daughter to read that, right? Because there is no such thing as censorship in literature. If you can't, who are we to say that other people can read some stuff and can't read other stuff? That form of censorship has to be thrown out of the window. But the idea here is that you have to actually learn from that kind of writings, learn that kind of ideology.
Because in the history textbooks, it's only mentioned 4 times, and it's not even explained what it is. In fact, the May 13th incident is only mentioned in the most broad terms. 4 times in the Form 5 history textbook.
So what is interesting about Hannah Alkaf, I think she's probably one of those few individuals in Malaysia, I mean, along with perhaps others, who has the courage to look squarely at this issue and try to create a meaning around this trauma. And I think for that, I think she's much better than many of our politicians who are either silent on the issue, or worse still, use it for political purposes in a very negative sense, not in a positive sense.
You know, let's look at the reality here. 70% of Malaysia, is still Malay. And when you have 7% of the voting population being from that particular.
Well, Malay or
yeah.
Bumiputra and Bumiputra.
Yeah, all right. The problem here is that you will have politicians who pander towards the extremists of this particular group or this particular cohort. You will have the liberal aspect of the spectrum, you have the conservative spectrum, but at the end of the day, you're going to have a certain number of politicians continue to pander towards the risk or reward of this particular cohort. How will we move forward if half of that population, let's say 35% of the population, is having that very negative view?
Okay,
right?
let's put it this way, right? Majoritarianism is not a uniquely Malaysian phenomenon. It's
Sure.
around
No.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Politicians like Narendra Modi in
Yeah.
India play to a majority,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
try to consolidate majority by creating other groups that they see as threatening or undermining their essential culture, whatever it is. It's a template. It's used around the world. How do we get over that? I think we have strong institutions. We need to show our bureaucracy is professional, our police are professional. They don't show a favor, and they don't favor one group or the other. Now, this is actually harder to achieve than one might think.
The
And when
argument of-
recently, when the police rallied against that other bogey, communism, 1,000 police officers, led the former IGP, rallied against this so-called threat of reviving the Communist Party, a laughable claim. But what's interesting is the background to that
Yeah, of course.
is the demand that they reform. And so they use that. And I think that was also one of the shocking moments of 2019.
So coming back to IPCMC, isn't it? So that was actually perhaps the root reason of why there was that protest. Now, I kind of want to, again, echo what I said a bit earlier about education when we talked about electoral reform. This has to do with education, but our historical education. Sometimes this historical amnesia that is adopted by our education system, by our politicians, and, you know, then by society, has done us no good at all because we haven't been able to kind of confront the demons of our past.
So who's lobbying for this, right? Who's lobbying for or against changing our our history books? Because for the IPCMC, I can imagine all the policemen out there and policewomen out there are actually lobbying their MPs. What constituency in Malaysia doesn't have a police station? You know, even here in Lembah Pantai, we have Bukit Aman being a very substantial voter,
Voter base,
segment
yeah.
of Lembah Pantai, right?
Well, yeah, but actually the larger population is much larger, much bigger. The other important thing for politicians to remember is that, you know, the country, if it's going to become democratic, needs to have its institutions accountable. And that's all the IPCMC...
How do we make sure that the institutions are accountable?
Well, that's how you create agencies or oversight bodies like the IPCMC. And the argument, of course, we're here is that it's postponed for a while. They're going to do more stakeholder engagement. The question is, when do you exhaust the stakeholder engagement, and when do you move decisively because you know that this is good for democracy? And this government is a government of the transition. It must take
We
tough
still have people,
measures.
right? We still have, my father, you know, still uses that, oh, you know, when I was, where was I, May 13th, 1969?
Yeah, exactly.
I was a young guy, I was just commissioned in the military, I went to the, Kampung Baru. We still have that. And the way my father tells me the stories, I hate to put that aluminum tinfoil hat, but
the conspiracy.
There has to be some conspiracy, right? Because the way my father tells me, it's very different from what I read
you're not isolated because
in the papers.
Because we haven't had this discourse as a country, what happens is we were having it, inherited memories from parents, one-sided views perhaps, whispered conversations, not openly discussed with facts and figures and real historical facts. And I think that's been a big problem for us. And I think we really need to kind of sit down with this. It's been 50 years.
If anything,
so,
history has shown us, truth will come out eventually.
All right, we're going to come back and continue this conversation right here on Consider This. Don't go anywhere.